From Community Public Radio, this is the CPR News. From New York, I'm Don DeBar. Today we go to Moscow to speak with commentator and analyst Mark Sloboda. Mark, welcome, and we'd like to give an update from you on what's been going on in and around Ukraine and in Russia and all of the things related to this mess that's going on.
Hey, Don, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and pleasure to be with you on CPR.
It's our pleasure also.
Okay, so in the last few days, the leader of the U.S.-backed regime in Kiev, Zelensky, says that the war for Donbass has begun. Well, I got some news to break to him. The war for Donbass began 8 years ago when the U.S.-backed Maidan Putsch seized power in the country,
Right.
violently unconstitutionally overthrew the government, and then began a civil conflict to subjugate the east of the country to their seizure of power in Kiev. And it's certainly been going on for the last 2 months, at an escalated level since the Russian intervention, primarily to secure the entirety of the Donbass so that the people there no longer have to live under terror and shelling and, the 15,000 plus death count of the people there does not go even higher. But there's no question that there is the Russian military has announced that essentially phase two of their military intervention, or special military operation, as they call it, is well underway.
Right.
And what this means is that the after an initial degradation of the Kiev regime's military around the country, the near annihilation of their air force, the suppression of I would not say all, but the vast majority of their air defense, the removal of their offensive capability, the tying up of a lot of their forces in several of their big cities, and most importantly, the envelopment of the majority of the Ukrainian regular armed forces, where they were positioned in Donbass, the outer fringes of Donbass administrative regions, poised for an attack on Donetsk and Lugansk. They have now effectively been surrounded. Right, there was a push from the north, from the Kharkov area south, and a push from the south north, from the Kherson region out of Crimea, and essentially now the cauldron, as they call it in Russian military terms, is complete, an envelopment. And there are some 40 to 100,000 Ukrainian regular military there. No one knows exactly how many. I was seeing numbers of 100,000 before the conflict began. Certainly, there already has been some degradation of that number there. But also, a significant development was the essentially Mariupol has been liberated or fallen, depending on your perspective. This last port city in the southeast of the Donbass region, effectively cutting the Kiev regime off from the Sea of Azov completely. This city had Mariupol, known historically for having a very high Greek Ukrainian population. They originally went for the Donbass
Right.
in 2014
In the referendum.
in a referendum,
That's right.
in the uprising against the new regime that seized power in a referendum. But Azov was brought in, and they were conquered. There was a massacre there that occurred around the police station. The local police had sided with the people, as it were, and the Azov neo-Nazi death squad was brought in, suppressed that, conquered the city, And then their national headquarters was put there, basically to keep the Azov jackboot on the people of Mariupol's
Right.
neck, to keep them under control. Um, because of the economic and strategic importance
Yeah,
of this city.
the geostrategic, particularly. This is their
Yeah,
outpost, pretty much, into the eastern
yeah,
part of the country.
that's right. So, that was restive all through this time. And it was one of the initial targets in phase one, and is probably the Ukrainian city that has definitely seen the most devastation. Right. The people, there's no love lost between the majority of the people of Mariupol and Azov. Right. They hate each other. Right. I mean, of
Right.
course, there is a certain percentage of the population, that some of them brought in, some of them originally there, that sided with the Maidan and everything. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say that some 80% of the population was not happy there. It doesn't mean they wanted to be caught up in a war zone, but they certainly did not like Azov. Um, and there are so many reports coming out from the Russian movements on the city of that the civilians were not allowed to use the humanitarian corridors by Azov, and more than that, they were actually snipers were set up on residential buildings, factories, stores, and anyone trying to flee the city was shot. And there's far too many accounts to dismiss this as some type of war propaganda. I have seen dozens and dozens of interviews, and I personally know people who have family there who have recounted the same thing before they lost contact with them in the early days of March.
Yep.
So we've also emerged in the last few days evidence by the Russian forces as they move forward. Um, the members of the regular Ukrainian military there, possibly some Azov members, had obviously been approaching Russian forces with a white flag of surrender and were shot in the back. And just today, um, I got reports that five members of the Ukrainian forces there. It's unclear exactly, what their composition was. Were they Azov? Were they regular military? Were they Marines or what? But five of them did manage to escape and surrender yesterday, and they brought with them copies of the documents that were signed by the deputy head of the Ukrainian National Defense Mobilization, the National Guard, which is essentially Azov.
Right.
And the order was that if anyone from any of the Ukrainian military forces, and you have to remember that the entire male population and no small part of the female population is conscripted at this
Right.
point, as the conscription age was actually lowered to 16.
16.
So
I know.
they're using child soldiers, 16
Yes.
to 60.
Which is a war
That if,
crime all by itself, by the way.
yeah, that's
Yes.
war. Yeah. That they were to be, anyone tried to surrender, they were to be summarily executed by Azov. That's it, and that backs up a lot of what we have been seeing. Anyway, so after the last more than a month of conflict, the Azov, the resistance, the Kiev regime forces in the city are now restricted to one small area, and that's all that's left. And this is the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. It is one of the major industrial areas, not just in the Donbass, but in all of Ukraine, if not the major one. It is a sprawling about 2 mile by 2 mile complex. And you could call it a city within a city. It was built during the Soviet Union, and it was built the way the Soviet Union builds things, which means it's essentially a concrete jungle and fortress. And then what's even more is that beneath this is a very large network of underground tunnels and bunkers. that were built during World War II beneath the factories to withstand a nuclear attack. Levels and levels and levels, set up as a professional military bunkers. So from what I've seen, as of 2 days ago, there was still some 3,000 fighters, mostly Azov, left in the tunnels beneath this. So if the factory was a city within a city, then this is a city under the city within the city. And theoretically, they could hold out there depending on how much ammunition, food, and water they have for a good amount of time. Because going into that rat's nest, like chasing ISIS in tunnels in Afghanistan, which incidentally were built by the United States, um, it's
That's right.
it nullifies any military advantages, and it just becomes a rat fight underground. It's a really
Right.
high casualty military operation for anyone. So I've heard some rumors that the Russian military just intends to flood the tunnels and have done with. They obviously haven't done that yet, so we'll see if that bears out.
Right.
At least in that case, they won't have to worry about not having enough water. Uh, yeah, black humor there. But
Well, on that, just one of the, I've heard Azov referred to now as vanilla ISIS.
yeah, so
So,
so yeah, there's some 300 or some 3,000 fighters there. Also, supposedly, are some 300 to 400 foreign guests, right? Definitely Western mercenaries there to fight
yeah,
for the Kiev regime, fight alongside the neo Nazis. Great moral crusade there.
right,
But there's also, the possibility that there are some NATO trainers, military trainers, special forces, intelligence there. We'll
right.
see as these last. I've seen them saying last hours. Well, considering the type of the complex it is, and it's more like final days at least, possibly stretch out to a couple weeks depending on how it goes. But they're essentially trapped within this very small area, and that frees up a lot of Russian military battalion tactical groups to move on to this cauldron
Uh-huh.
in the north. Um, and it has to be said that Azov says that they've got some 500 civilians with them in these tunnels. Now, why any civilians would willingly crawl underground with a bunch of doomed neo Nazis
Right,
when it, you know, every single day for several hours a day, right? The Russian military announces and broadcasts on all radio frequencies in the area and everything that humanitarian corridors are open to get people out. So the question remains, are these people free? Are they
right,
literal hostages and human shields? Are they the family members of this Azov?
right,
We don't know. We don't even know if they exist.
right,
There hasn't actually been any proof of that.
right,
But regardless, we have seen Russia for the first time use their Air Force bombers
right,
on this steel factory on the presumption that there aren't any civilians there, and if they are, they're being held against their will anyway.
right.
And certainly the Russian military is going to use fire here, meaning artillery, aerial bombardment, and the like, because there aren't or there shouldn't be any civilians there. Certainly none that aren't being used as human shields, and they don't have to worry about collateral damage by most accounts.
Again, let's
So,
remind people that only 8 years ago, 80% of the people there voted to secede from this
yep,
Ukraine, and that was from the government, not the Nazis that made the
yep.
government do bad things. Now, these people are not willingly hanging out with the Nazis for sure.
If there's any left, again.
Right, unless it's their family members, and again, if
Yeah,
there's anyone at all, right? We don't even know that.
so anyway, every day still there's a several hours a day window that a ceasefire is called and a humanitarian corridor, but no one is getting out. And with this emergence of this order, to shoot anyone trying to surrender. Russian military have encountered several times in the last few days Ukrainian soldiers that were obviously approaching them with the white flag of surrender and had been shot in the back. So
Yep.
yeah, it's a pretty grim situation all around. But these are Mariupol is essentially at this point, and that cuts Ukraine off from the Sea of Azov, from the southeast, and opens up a lot for the development of this cauldron.
Right.
And in recent days, in the last, I would say, 36, 72 hours, Russia has been making strikes, caliber, and possibly some airstrikes on the last supply linkages into this cauldron area, cutting off trains going in, hitting the train tracks, not the stations, and so on.
Right.
This is practically completed, and there was an initial opening about 12 hours of heavy artillery, and the Russian military has the heaviest artillery in the world. They are a heavy artillery military against these Kiev regime fortifications, and then they started a broad spectrum push forward. And already one small city and several towns have, been cleared.
Right.
This is a really important area. The concentration of Kiev regime forces here. It's on the outskirts of Donbass. It's basically between the small cities of Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, and Severodonetsk. And this is a really important area because Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, this is where the uprising against the newly installed Kiev regime started. This is where the first uprisings took place. The first conflicts of the civil conflict 8 years ago began, and it was one of the areas they were pushed back from. So this is a hugely symbolic
Right.
area for both sides, right? For Donbass and Russia, for the East Ukrainians and for the regime in Kiev.
Yeah,
Uh,
Slavyansk was the first to try to withdraw, to try to pull out of Ukraine, basically,
yes,
to
yes,
secede.
yes,
Right.
yeah. That was the heart, the first beat of what would become the Donetsk National Republic, and then the Lugansk National Republic. So this has, besides just the military value, this has huge strategic value as
Right.
well.
Right.
And by all accounts, this is going to be a huge World War II scale and size of fight. With the number of Ukrainian forces there, there's already dueling artillery. They still have artillery of their own there. They don't have any air force left to deal with, but they are heavily dug in. Russia is going to be using a lot of fire, right? A lot of
Right.
artillery fire and airstrikes and targeted cruise missile strikes to dislodge them there. And
What's the
again,
terrain
they're
like there?
constant.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The terrain there, yeah, it's still mostly flat terrain there in Donbass. You're starting to get into the, some hilly region there,
Right.
but like much of Ukraine, it's still fairly flat. There is some mining in the area. Like I said, the Donbass is kind of a hilly area, but this is still on the fringes of it. So it's still, in general terms, it's pretty clear terrain.
Because I can see it
Um,
looks like I mean, you come across the Dnieper River, all right, and if you up at the top near the Russian border, you've got Kharkiv. Down at the bottom, you've got either Mariupol or, depending on how far west you want to go, Bryansk and Melitopol. But and from, I mean, in essence, the part that's east of the Dnieper River doesn't go straight down, but that's all in play now in this battle, right? I mean,
yeah,
if you, yeah, and then along the coast, if Russia secures Odessa,
yeah,
Ukraine is landlocked.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, that's what's at
So
stake.
there's also a general push at the same time. Kharkov has the city in the northeast, again, a city that almost went to the Donbass rebellion
Right.
in 2014 against the new regime. But actually, the mayor, this was actually discussed in Foreign Policy magazine. The oligarch Kolomoisky, he worked with the Ukrainian criminal mafia mafia in the city to help suppress. He was quite proud of it,
Right.
to suppress the Russian Spring, as they called it at the time. It again. It's a Russian-speaking city that strongly votes for the opposition to the Maidan when they're
Right.
allowed the opportunity to do so.
Right.
Doesn't mean they want to be caught up in a war,
Nobody
but
does. Nobody
yeah,
wants to be caught up in a
it
war.
does. That said, if Kharkov falls, as well as this large agglomeration of Kiev regime forces in this triangle on the outskirts of Donbass, that's essentially it, right? That the uh,
Right.
the Russian forces will be able to sweep East Ukraine up to the Dnieper. The Dnipropetrovsk will be the last holdout there, right on the river
Right.
itself,
Right.
and that will be Russian-speaking East Ukraine. Um, and simply either forcing the surrender, hopefully, or the neutralization of this big. This is the largest part of the Kiev regime's regular armed forces. If they're gone one way or the other, and we hope it's surrender, seeing reason. The Russian military has constantly repeated, "We're not here to fight you. We're here against the regime that seized power in 2014 with Western assistance, and we don't want to fight you." But when orders are being given out by the neo-Nazis among the ranks to kill anyone trying to surrender, and they have complete control of the information flow to the conscripts. And remember, this is a conscript army. It
Yeah.
it, it becomes difficult. But once they are, taken care of one way or the other, then theoretically, if there is anyone sane left in the regime in Kiev, that would be a moment for a Russia to push for a negotiated peace settlement on Russian terms that
Right.
realistically they should accept,
Right.
right? But we just heard from the Kiev regime's foreign minister in the last 24 hours, Kuleba, that they have no intention of any diplomatic settlement or peace solution.
Yeah.
This will be won on the battlefield, as they say. Well, there you go.
There's something about this also because you sort of tickled this in my brain when you stated the fact that the Russians essentially trying to remove the government that was installed by a coup. Uh, you know, we haven't really seen. There's been sort of a backgrounder to this. That look, there was an elected government. That government was elected in a divided country with the support largely of people in the East.
Yes.
They were removed. That government was oriented towards neutrality and
Yes.
or
Well, every
and or
government, right?
closer.
Ukraine was not only neutral, it was enshrined in the constitution
Right.
from 92 to 2014 that Ukraine would be neutral. So
Yeah.
this is
So yeah.
this sudden
Yeah.
geopolitical flip. This
Right.
is new.
Right.
It,
Right.
it
Right.
was they actually had to change the constitution once
Right. To
they
do
seized
this.
power.
Yeah. So you
And
have that, and then you have this government that's installed by. I mean, on a phone call by the U.S., they're picking the officials. We heard
yeah,
this, and. And then they declare war, in essence, on the people in the East. They outlaw the language. They elevate this guy who murdered Russians and Jews and anybody else that got in their sight
all
into a national
leftists.
hero,
Yeah.
all of this stuff. And so, after 8 years of watching the people in the East get slaughtered, Russia comes in. Now, I want to compare that to the scenario in Yemen with Hadi and the Saudis, where you had a president not removed during his lawful term by a coup, but whose term ran out and who tried to
And
stay
it has to
in
be
office.
said, he ran in an election with no opponent.
Yeah, and after that
I
term
think
was
that was
over.
a quote election. I mean, literally, no
Yeah.
opponents. He was the only one on the ballot.
That was really that was a brokered deal, really, after the
He
war
was a
too.
Saudi and U.S. installed man.
Right.
And,
But his term was up, and then there was an uprising, and this wasn't an instigated from the outside uprising. It was a popular uprising against the guy who was imposed on them. He ran to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia declared war on Yemen to try to reimpose him. And for the last 6 years or whatever, under that fiction, until finally even they couldn't stand him, and they did to him what Hitler ended up doing to Bandera. They threw him in jail. This is the difference between the legitimacy of the argument of the Russians if they were to stand on it and say, look, we're in here restoring the legitimate government.
Yeah.
compared to what the Saudis are doing with the U.S. help. And the U.S. has murdered tens of thousands of people as an accomplice.
Well, well, got hypocrisy, right?
Yeah, that's whataboutism,
Yeah.
right? We don't want to hear about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, the people in East Ukraine are pro-Russian, so they don't really count as human beings. We
Right,
know that they don't have agency. They don't
right.
deserve human rights. And the
Untermensch.
people in Yemen that overthrew Hadi, they are Iranian-backed Houthis, right? They're
They
they're
don't count
they're
either.
also not. They're
No,
also have no agency and have no, they're not deserving of lives or human rights or anything, or
right,
anything of the like.
right.
Again, the when your degree of human empathy and sympathy and outrage is directed only in line with your government's hegemonic geopolitical interests, I'm gonna wave the BS flag on that one.
This is April, and every April 4th, when I am on the air, I play Martin Luther King's speech at the Riverside Church, delivered April 4th of 1967, in which he refers to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. And think about all of the people killed by that government from 1967 forward, including Martin Luther King, by the way, from then until now in the last 55 years. And we're looking at this entire scenario there, which is a creature of the U.S. government, of the State Department, and of Langley, and of the Biden administration, and of the look the other way Trump administration, and the aggressive Obama administration, and we're seeing a body count. And at that, the body count in this war before the butcher Russians, according to the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, as of today, 2,200 people.
I suspect it's higher than that, but that's still, again, less than the civilian casualties you've seen from the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq over an even longer time frame. And you know, you want to talk genocide? Yeah, sorry, Yemen is a real
Yep,
case of
sure enough.
mass genocide, mass starvation. That's what it actually looks like. And of course, it's militarily backed, and the U.S. has actually, by providing, they've had special forces on the ground, they've provided some drone strikes, they're providing active IS-4R to
Right.
the Saudi
Air Force, yeah, yeah,
and UAE forces
right,
there.
right.
Yeah, that is, and they're the Saudis trained by in the U.S. on U.S. planes, dropping U.S. made bombs. That Yeah, that is direct military support.
Yeah, and guided by U.S. AWACS, by the way, right?
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
satellite information. Yeah, right. So, anyway, we had about a minute and a half left. What else do we need to know about what's happened in the last week?
Um, well, I mean, first of all, obviously, peace negotiations have completely ceased. I don't didn't think there was ever any real substance to them anyway, but that is certainly off the table. Right now, there is a showdown economically. Right now, of course, the ruble was supposed to have collapsed. The Russian economy was supposed to have been destroyed. And I keep expecting worse than far worse than what we've seen. And
Oopsie
I
doo.
still like, well, it may come yet, but it hasn't come yet. And the ruble clawed its way back
Right,
with through a series of financial controls and the announcement that Russian gas and in the future other commodities was going to be linked to Russian gas and gold.
right,
Then that strengthened the ruble right up.
right,
And so the economic war is not having the crushing results it is supposed to. But with the announcement that unfriendly countries, i.e., countries sanctioning Russia, would now have to start paying Russia in rubles rather than in dollars or euros,
right.
most of the EU countries are balking at this, even though they don't really have any choice. They get some 40% of their
Yeah,
gas and some 35% of their oil and a similar amount of coal from
Right.
Russia.
So they're stuck.
Slovakia and Hungary have agreed to pay in rubles. The rest of the European has not yet.
And that's
there's a showdown,
That's
a
right.
chicken.
I still have a few hundred rubles left from the last time I saw you in Moscow, and so maybe I could be able to buy gas the next time I go to the gas station, where some of my neighbors may not. Mark, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you real soon.
Cheers.
And that's all the news we have for you right now. For Community Public Radio, I'm Don DeBar in New York. Thanks for listening.